In 1631 in London, two royal printers, Robert Barker and Martin Lucas, made an error. It was a small mistake, a single word, 3 letters. In a book of over 780,000 words, they omitted one. The book was the Bible. The word was not. And the verse Exodus 20:14, the Seventh Commandment, now read, "Thou shalt commit adultery." King Charles I was not entertained. The printers were hauled before the Star Chamber, fined £300, which was a sum equivalent to 15 years of wages for a skilled labourer, and stripped of their licence. The edition was recalled and burned with such thoroughness that only a handful of copies survive today, scattered across private collections and museum vaults known to bibliophiles as the Wicked Bible. Now, you might hear this story and think, well, that's an amusing historical footnote. Typos happen. But I want you to sit with something uncomfortable. That missing word was not caught by the typesetters. It was not caught by the proofreaders. It was not caught by the publishers. It was not caught by the booksellers. It was not caught by the purchasers. For months, perhaps years, copies of the Holy Bible circulated through England with a commandment from God Almighty instructing His faithful to commit adultery. And no one noticed. How is that possible? How could the most read, most memorized, and most sacred text in Christendom contain a commandment to sin, and no one see it? And to you, the soul members, the inner circle, welcome to the deep end. You are here because you are not satisfied with the Sunday school version of reality. You support this channel because you demand the depths. This is why you are seeing this first. This is a 2-hour descent into the shadow library, and it is not for the casual observer. It requires attention, it requires courage, it requires you. So take a breath. We are about to peel back the veil. The answer is simple, and it is the key to everything that follows. People don't read the Bible. They think they do, but they read what they expect to see. We approach this book with such familiarity and assume knowledge that we become blind to what is actually on the page. We see the Bible we were taught about. We see the Bible of sermons and Sunday schools. We see the Bible of cultural assumption, but we do not see the Bible that exists. And the actual text of that Bible, in its original languages, with its strange marks and missing books and mathematical codes and archaeological silences, is far stranger, far more complex, and far more fascinating than the sanitized version most people carry in their heads. This video is about that other Bible, the one hiding beneath the one you think you know. Over the next 2 hours, we are going to do something dangerous. We are going to actually look. We are going to peel back layers that most readers never touch. Layers of translation, editing, deliberate suppression, and scribal encoding. We are going to discover that Israel's scriptures emerged from a vast literary world stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates, borrowing and transforming stories that existed centuries before Abraham supposedly left Ur. We are going to examine what the earth itself has testified about the claims of this book. We are going to uncover traces of the gods that Israel once acknowledged before the theological revolution that produced monotheism. We are going to decode the numerical patterns and celestial symbolism that mystics have studied for millennia. We are going to encounter the feminine face of the divine, suppressed but never fully erased. And we are going to descend into the psychological depths where these ancient narratives continue to map the human soul. I am not here to destroy your faith or to defend it. I am here because I believe that a text this influential deserves to be understood on its own terms and not the terms we impose upon it. 2 billion people call this book sacred. Empires have risen and fallen over its interpretation. Wars have been fought over single words, and yet most people who revere it have never encountered it in its actual complexity. That changes now. But before we descend into the depths, I need to show you something else about the surface, because the Wicked Bible was not an anomaly, it was a symptom. The Wicked Bible belongs to a taxonomy of printing disasters that scholars have catalogued with grim amusement. Each reveals how easily the sacred text could be corrupted and how long corruptions could persist. In 1612, the Printer's Bible rendered Psalm 119, 161, as printers have persecuted me without a cause, instead of princes. Exhausted typesetters, one imagines, projecting their suffering onto King David. In 1653, the unrighteous Bible declared that the unrighteous shall inherit the kingdom of God, omitting the crucial "not" that separates salvation theology from its opposite. In 1763, the Fool's Bible committed what may be the most theologically catastrophic typo in history. Psalm 14. One is supposed to read, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." The Fool's Bible printed, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is a God." The psalmist's atheistic antagonist became a theist. Belief in God became the mark of foolishness. You might think, surely before the printing press, when monks copied scripture by hand with painstaking devotion, the text was more stable. You would be wrong. The printing press introduced new errors, but it also froze them. Before printing, the text was in constant flux. Every copy was made by hand. Every copyist was human. And humans, even devout humans, even meticulous humans, make mistakes. They skip lines when their eyes jump. They mishear when copying from dictation. They correct passages they think contain errors. They harmonize differences between parallel accounts. They add marginal notes that later copyists incorporate into the main text. They are influenced by theological assumptions that shape what they see. The New Testament alone exists in over 5,800 Greek manuscripts. No two are identical. Scholars have catalogued hundreds of thousands of variants and thus places where the manuscripts disagree. Most variants are trivial and include spelling differences, word order, and obvious scribal slips. But some are not trivial at all. Some change the meaning of entire passages. Some add verses that did not originally exist. Some reveal centuries of theological warfare waged in the margins of Holy Writ. We will explore those battles soon. But first, I want to show you an error that was not made by printers or copyists. An error that was made by one of the greatest minds in the history of the Church. An error that shaped 1,000 years of Western art and contributed to centuries of persecution. In Rome, in the Church of San Pietro in Vincoli, you can see one of Michelangelo's masterpieces. A massive marble statue of Moses, seated, clutching the tablets of the law, his face carved with prophetic intensity. And protruding from his head are two unmistakable horns, not a halo, not rays of light. Horns, like a goat, like a devil. If you know nothing else about this statue, you might assume it was some kind of artistic rebellion of a Renaissance master taking liberties with sacred subject matter, or perhaps something darker. An anti-Semitic caricature depicting the Jewish lawgiver as demonic, perhaps. But Michelangelo was not rebelling. He was being faithful to the Bible he knew, the Latin Vulgate translation, which had dominated Western Christianity for a millennium. Here's what happened. Exodus 34:29, 35 describes Moses descending Mount Sinai after receiving the Torah. The encounter with God has transformed his face. The Hebrew text uses the verb karan to describe this transformation. The root of karan is related to the noun keren, which means horn. But as a verb, karan means something different, to send forth rays, to shine, to radiate. It is a metaphor. Moses' face was sending out beams of light, the way a horn projects from a head. His face was projecting radiance. The Greek Septuagint, translated by Jewish scholars centuries before Christ, understood the metaphor accurately. They rendered it as glorified, like a king with a crown and a scepter. But when St. Jerome translated the Hebrew into Latin in the late 4th century, producing the Vulgate that would dominate Western Christianity for over 1,000 years, he made a different choice. He translated the verb literally, cornuta esset facies sua. His face was horned. Jerome knew Hebrew. He worked in the Holy Land. He may well have understood that this was a metaphor for radiance. Some scholars believe he chose the literal translation deliberately to preserve the Hebrew wordplay. Others believe he simply made a mistake. Whatever his intention, the consequence was that for a millennium, Western Christians believed Moses had horns. Artists depicted him with horns. Sculptures gave him horns. The greatest lawgiver in Israel's history, the man who spoke with God face to face, was visualized as a horned being. And this image tragically converged with anti-Semitic propaganda. If the Jewish prophet had horns, perhaps Jews themselves were demonic. Perhaps their laws were satanic. Perhaps the people of the book were the people of the devil. A translation choice, a metaphor rendered literally, and centuries of visual reinforcement of hatred. The original Hebrew text meant to describe something beautiful, a human face so saturated with divine presence that it radiated light. What 1,000 years of Christianity saw was a prophet who looked like a demon. But the horns of Moses, however consequential, are not the most significant translation controversy in biblical history. That distinction belongs to a single word in the book of Isaiah, a word that has shaped the theological identity of the world's largest religion, Isaiah 7:14. The prophet speaks to King Ahaz during a military crisis around 735 BCE. Two enemy kings are marching on Jerusalem. Ahaz is terrified. Isaiah offers a sign. Behold, a woman shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. In the Hebrew original, the word for woman is Alma. An Alma is a young woman of marriageable age. It does not specify virginity. Hebrew has another word, Betula, often used when virginity is more clearly intended, though scholars debate whether even this term always denotes virginity. But when Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, producing the Septuagint around the 3rd century BCE, they rendered Alma as Parthenos, and Parthenos in Greek carries a much stronger connotation of virginity. The Gospel of Matthew, written in Greek, quotes Isaiah 7:14 as a prophecy of Jesus' birth. Behold, a virgin shall conceive. The doctrine of the virgin birth, a cornerstone of Christian theology, affirmed in creeds, celebrated in art, and defended in councils, rests on this specific Greek word choice. Was this a mistranslation, an interpretation, a prophetic insight that saw deeper meaning than the original author intended? The answer depends entirely on your theological commitments. What is beyond dispute is the magnitude of the consequence. A single word, rendered differently in different languages, became the foundation of Christian Mariology. And here is the deeper irony. When Isaiah spoke these words, he was not gazing into a distant messianic future. He was standing in front of a terrified king facing an immediate military crisis. The year was approximately 735 BCE. Two enemy kings, Rezin of Aram and Pekah of Israel, had allied and were marching on Jerusalem. King Ahaz was paralyzed with fear. The text says, "His heart and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind." Isaiah came to Ahaz with a message: "Do not fear, these two kings will fail." And then he offered a sign, a way for Ahaz to know that God's promise was true. The sign was that a young woman would conceive and bear a son, and before that child is old enough to know right from wrong, both enemy kings will be gone. A countdown. The child is a clock. Isaiah is saying, start timing from this pregnancy. Before this baby becomes a toddler who understands yes and no, your enemies will be destroyed. And historically, that is exactly what happened. Within 3 years, the Assyrian Empire swept through the region. Rezin was killed. Pekah was assassinated. The two kings who terrified Ahaz were gone. The Hebrew prophecy was fulfilled in its own time, for its own audience. The Greek translation opened it to a meaning Isaiah never imagined. The Greek translation opened it to cosmic reinterpretation. Both meanings exist. Both have shaped history, but they do not have the same meaning. I could continue this catalogue indefinitely. The unicorns that populated the King James Bible because translators did not recognize the extinct aurochs. The demon Lilith in Isaiah 34 rendered as a screech owl because translators were uncomfortable with explicit demonology. The Greek words for love, agape, and phileo collapsed into one English word, erasing the nuance of Jesus' conversation with Peter. The word metanoia, or transformation of consciousness, rendered as repentance, shifting the meaning from psychological revolution to guilty contrition. Every translation is an interpretation. Every interpretation is a choice, and every choice illuminates some dimensions of the original while obscuring others. This is not an argument against translation. Without translation, most of humanity would have no access to these texts. But it is an argument for humility and for curiosity. The Bible you read in English is a magnificent artifact. It is also a veil. Behind it lies another text in other languages, encoding other meanings. And even that Hebrew and Greek text, as we will see, is not the complete picture. Because the biblical authors themselves quoted books that no longer exist. The surface is fragile, typos corrupt it, translations distort it. And beneath that fragile surface, there are gaps and places where something once stood that has since been erased. We are about to enter the shadow library. Open the Bible to Numbers 21:14. You will read a curious phrase. Therefore it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord. The text then quotes poetry from this book of the wars of the Lord. But the book itself, this book is lost. No manuscript survives. No copy exists anywhere on earth. We know it only because the Bible quotes it. This is not an isolated case. The Hebrew Bible explicitly cites at least 21 books that have vanished from history. The book of Joshua 10:13, 2 Samuel 1:18, was a collection of heroic poetry that apparently contained the famous scene where Joshua commands the sun to stand still. Lost. The annals of the kings of Israel are referenced several times in 2 Kings as the source for information about Israel's monarchs. It is lost. The annals of the kings of Judah are referenced 15 times for the southern kingdom. It is lost. The Acts of Solomon, 1 Kings 11:41, detailing Solomon's wisdom and achievements. Lost. The prophetic visions of Iddo the seer, 2 Chronicles 9:29, concerning Solomon and Jeroboam. Lost. Even in the New Testament, Paul mentions a letter to the Laodiceans, Colossians 4:16, a letter he wrote which instructed other churches to read, considered important enough to circulate. This is lost as well. Think about what this means. The biblical authors were not writing in a vacuum. They were part of a larger literary culture. They read books, quoted books, and assumed their readers knew books. Books that have since been destroyed by fire, decay, conquest, or simple neglect. The Bible we possess is not the complete library of ancient Israel. It is the survivor of a larger collection, and the loss of that collection means we are reading texts whose references we can no longer fully understand. Imagine reading a book that constantly references another book you have never seen. As the book of Joshua says, but you cannot check the book of Joshua. You cannot read it for context. You cannot see what the author saw. That is our situation with the Bible. But the shadow library is not only composed of books that were accidentally lost. Some books were deliberately excluded. One ancient text that did survive, though barely, and through a single surviving tradition, holds the key to understanding some of the New Testament's strangest elements. The Book of Enoch, also called First Enoch, was composed between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE. It was enormously popular. Fragments were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in greater quantity than many biblical books. Early church fathers quoted it. The New Testament letter of Jude quotes it directly as prophecy, and then it was lost to the Western world for over 1,000 years. It survived only in Ethiopia, where the Orthodox Church included it in their biblical canon. When European explorers brought copies back in the 18th century, scholars discovered something remarkable. Enoch answers questions that the Bible raises but does not answer. Genesis 6:1-4 contains one of the most enigmatic passages in Scripture. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. Who are the sons of God? Who are the Nephilim? Genesis does not say. It introduces these mysterious figures and then moves on to the flood narrative without explanation. However, Enoch explains. According to 1st Enoch, 200 angels called Watchers descended to earth on Mount Hermon, took human wives, and produced giant offspring called the Nephilim. Their leaders included Shemihazah and Azazel. They taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Azazel revealed metalworking and cosmetics. Others revealed astrology, herbalism, and magic. God sent the flood to destroy the corrupted earth. The Nephilim died, but here is the crucial detail. Their spirits did not die. 1 Enoch 15:8. 12 teaches that when the giants' bodies were destroyed, their spirits were cursed to wander the earth as evil spirits, because they were born from physical bodies but are now disembodied. They desperately seek physical form because they were created for embodiment. This is the origin of demons in Second Temple Jewish belief. Demons are not simply fallen angels. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, who are the hybrid offspring of angels and humans, desperate for physical form because they were born from bodies and lost them in the flood. Now read the Gospels again. Why do demons beg Jesus not to send them into the abyss? Why do they seek to inhabit bodies, human bodies, pig bodies, and any bodies? Why are they so terrified of homelessness? Because they remember having bodies, because bodilessness is their curse. The New Testament authors assumed this cosmology. They did not need to explain where demons came from because everyone who read 1st Enoch already knew. But because Enoch was excluded from most biblical canons, modern readers encounter demons in the Gospels with no origin story. The shadow library shapes our reading even when we cannot see it. In December 1945, in the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi, a peasant named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer when his mattock struck something hard. He unearthed a sealed clay jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts representing varieties of Christianity that the Orthodox Church had worked to destroy. While most scholars date these texts to the 2nd and 3rd centuries, later than the canonical Gospels, they preserve a radically different spiritual tradition. These Gnostic Gospels revealed that early Christianity was far more diverse than later tradition suggested. The Gospel of Thomas contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. Some parallel the canonical Gospels. Others are unique and strange. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The Gospel of Philip describes Mary Magdalene as Jesus' close companion, using language that has fueled centuries of speculation. The companion of the Mary Magdalene loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her. The manuscript has holes where the crucial words should be. The Apocryphon of John presents an entirely different creation myth. The God who made the material world is not the true God, but a flawed, ignorant being called Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge. The serpent in Eden was not a villain but a liberator, awakening Adam and Eve to their divine origin. And these texts circulated widely. Church fathers wrote entire treatises refuting them. Bishops ordered their destruction. The Bible we have is the result of deliberate choices about what to include and what to burn. History is usually written by the victors, but the flame of truth is preserved by the curious. It is preserved by the few, by people like you, who are willing to dig in the jars of Nag Hammadi and support the excavation of difficult truths. But the shadow library is not only composed of excluded books. Some shadows exist within the canonical text itself as passages that were added centuries after the original writing. Open the Gospel of Mark to chapter 16. In almost every Bible on earth, you will read verses 9 through 20. Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene, commissions the disciples, and ascends to heaven. It is the ending we expect. But if you look at the bottom of the page, you might see a small italicized note. The earliest manuscripts do not include these verses. That note is hiding a massive historical struggle. When we examine the two oldest, most complete Bibles in existence, the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus, both from the 300s, the text stops dead at verse 8. The women find the tomb empty. A young man tells them Jesus is risen, and they flee in terror. The final words are, "They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." Terror, silence, the end. But this isn't just a case of a missing page. The manuscripts themselves look like a crime scene. In Codex Vaticanus, the scribe stopped writing at verse 8, but then did something unprecedented. He left an entire column blank. It is the only blank column in the New Testament of that codex. It's as if the scribe knew something else belonged there, but didn't have the text or refused to write it. A moment of scribal hesitation frozen in vellum for 1,600 years. In Codex Sinaiticus, the situation is even stranger. The pages containing the end of Mark are written by a different hand than the rest of the book. The scribe had to stretch out the lettering of the previous verses just to fill the space, preventing a blank gap. Why the confusion? Why the blank spaces and replaced pages? The great translator Jerome, writing in the 4th century, admitted that this longer ending was absent from almost all Greek copies, yet he included it in his Latin Vulgate anyway. Why? Because the alternative was theological chaos. Bruce Metzger, the titan of modern textual criticism, pointed out that verses 9 through 20 contain 18 Greek words that appear nowhere else in Mark. The style shifts completely. It reads like a summary of the other Gospels, tacked onto the end. The evidence suggests that the original Gospel of Mark ended in the dark. No appearances, no Great Commission, just an empty tomb and a fear so great it silenced the witnesses. To the early church, this raw cliffhanger ending may have felt incomplete, or perhaps the original ending was physically lost, torn from the bottom of a scroll. Either way, later Christians couldn't let the story end in silence, so they healed the wound. They added an ending that harmonized Mark with Matthew and Luke. But the scars of that surgery remain visible in the manuscripts today, a testament to the human hands that shaped the divine word. One more shadow. John 7:53 to 8:11 contains one of the most beloved stories in the Gospels, the woman caught in adultery. The scribes and Pharisees drag her before Jesus, demanding that she be stoned according to the law of Moses. Jesus writes in the dirt. He says, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." One by one her accusers leave. Jesus tells her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." It is a powerful story of mercy and moral humility, and it is almost certainly not original to John's Gospel. The passage is absent from the earliest and best manuscripts. When it does appear in later manuscripts, it shows up in different locations. After John 7:52, after John 21:25, even in Luke's Gospel, after chapter 21. Raymond Brown, the eminent Johannine scholar, concluded that the story is probably an authentic tradition about Jesus, but not originally part of John's Gospel. It was a floating story that found a home in different places in different manuscripts, until it settled into its current location. The story may well preserve something Jesus actually did, but John did not write it there. I am not telling you these things to shake your faith, but because the alternative of ignorance of how the text actually developed is worse. The Bible you hold in your hands is a survivor. It survived through centuries of hand copying, editorial decisions about what to include and exclude, and translations that introduced new meanings and erased old ones. What survived is remarkable, but what did not survive, the lost books, the removed passages, the alternative traditions, also shape the text we have. To read the Bible honestly is to read it with awareness of its shadows, a reason for wonder. Against all odds, this library of texts persisted through millennia of our handling. It was copied by monks who did not always understand what they copied. It was translated by scholars who made choices, good and bad, that shaped civilizations. It was edited by committees who preserved some voices and silenced others. And through it all, it kept speaking. But the Bible did not speak in silence. It spoke within a conversation, a literary world that stretched from the Nile to the Euphrates, producing texts for millennia before Abraham supposedly left Ur. We have entered the shadow library and seen the lost books that the Bible quotes but cannot produce. The Book of Jasher, the Annals of the Kings, the vanished letter to Laodicea. But there is another library, one that was never lost because it was never Israelite. A library of texts that existed before the Bible was written, in languages Israel learned from its neighbors, telling stories that the Bible retells. The Hebrew Bible did not emerge from a vacuum. It emerged from the ancient Near East, a literary culture stretching from Egypt to Mesopotamia, producing texts for millennia before Abraham supposedly left Ur. And some of those texts are eerily familiar. In December 1853, a young Assyriologist named Hormuzd Rassam was excavating the ruins of Nineveh, once the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Among the thousands of clay tablets he recovered from the library of King Ashurbanipal, was one that would reshape biblical scholarship forever. George Smith, a self-taught cuneiformist at the British Museum, was cataloguing Rassam's finds when he encountered tablet 11 of a series. As he deciphered the ancient Akkadian, he grew increasingly agitated. What he found was the flood story, but not Noah's flood, an older flood, a Babylonian flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh, composed at least 1,000 years before Genesis was written, describes a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. One man, Utnapishtim, is warned by the god Ea and instructed to build a boat. He loads his family and the seed of all living creatures. The flood comes. The waters cover the mountains. After 7 days, the boat grounds on a mountain. Utnapishtim sends out a dove. It returns, finding no resting place. He sends out a swallow. It too returns. He sends out a raven. It does not return. The waters have receded. Utnapishtim offers sacrifice. The gods smelled the sweet savor and gathered like flies over the sacrifice. The parallels to Genesis 6:9 are overwhelming. The divine decision to flood, the one righteous man warned. The boat is loaded with animals, the mountain landing, the birds sent out, the dove that returns, the raven that doesn't, the sacrifice afterward, even the gods smelling the savor. Genesis 8:21 uses nearly identical language. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. George Smith announced his discovery on December 3, 1872, to a packed meeting of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. The Prime Minister, William Gladstone, was in the audience. The Daily Telegraph offered £1,000 to fund further excavations. The implications were staggering. The biblical flood story was not unique. It was a variant of a story that Mesopotamians had been telling for a millennium before the earliest possible date for Genesis. Did the Israelites borrow the story? Did they transform it? Was there a common source, an older flood tradition that both cultures inherited? Scholars continue to debate these questions, but the relationship is undeniable, and the flood is not alone. The Babylonian creation epic, known as Enuma Elish, from its opening words, "When on high," describes the origins of the cosmos. But it is a violent origin. The god Marduk battles Tiamat, the primordial chaos dragon, goddess of the salt sea. He defeats her and splits her body in two, creating heaven from one half and earth from the other. Now read Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. The Hebrew word for deep is tehom. Many scholars believe it is etymologically related to Tiamat, both deriving from a common Semitic root meaning the primordial abyss. In Enuma Elish, Tiamat is a monster to be slaughtered. In Genesis, Tehom is simply water, passive and unpersonified, waiting for God to shape it. The Israelite authors knew the Babylonian combat myth. They deliberately subverted it. There is no battle in Genesis 1, no conflict, no slain dragon. God speaks and creation obeys. Let there be light, and there is light. The violence of the Mesopotamian theogony is replaced by the serene sovereignty of Israelite monotheism. Genesis argues with Enuma Elish. It takes the same raw materials and reshapes them into a theological counterstatement. The library behind the Bible includes legal texts as well. The Code of Hammurabi was carved on a black diorite stele around 1754 BCE, almost half a millennium before Moses supposedly received the Torah. The stele depicts Hammurabi receiving the law from Shamash, the sun god, just as Moses would later receive the law from Yahweh. The laws themselves contain striking parallels. Hammurabi's Law 196, if a man has destroyed the eye of another man, his eye shall be destroyed. Exodus 21:24, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. The principle of lex talionis, proportional retribution, appears in both codes. But there are crucial differences. Hammurabi's laws are class stratified. Law 196 applies when the victim is a nobleman. Law 198 states, if he has destroyed the eye of a commoner, he shall pay 1 mina of silver. Law 199. If he has destroyed the eye of a gentleman's slave, he shall pay half the slave's price. The punishment depends on the victim's social class. Blind a nobleman, lose your eye. Blind a slave, pay money. Biblical law narrows the gap significantly. Among free Israelites, eye for eye applies to all, regardless of wealth. While the Bible still maintained distinctions between the free and the enslaved, it introduced a revolutionary concept, that a king is subject to the same divine law as a peasant. The theological foundation that humans are created in the image of God began a trajectory toward egalitarianism that Mesopotamian law did not envision. The Bible borrowed the form but transformed the content. The Ugaritic texts, discovered beginning in 1929 at Ras Shamra in modern Syria, opened yet another window into the world behind the Bible. Ugarit was a flourishing city destroyed around 1200 BCE, just before Israel emerged as a recognizable entity. Its library preserved texts in a language closely related to Hebrew, describing a religion closely related to what the Bible condemns as Canaanite idolatry. The storm god Baal controlled thunder and lightning and fertility. His epithet was rider of the clouds. Psalm 68:4 applies this identical epithet to Yahweh. The Baal cycle, a series of tablets describing Baal's conflicts with Yam, the sea, and Mot, death, provides the mythological background for numerous biblical passages. When the Psalms describe Yahweh conquering the sea monster, when Job references Leviathan, when Isaiah prophesies that Yahweh will slay the dragon that is in the sea, they are drawing on imagery that Ugarit spelled out explicitly. The Bible emerged from this world. It spoke this language, it knew these stories, and it transformed them. The transformation is the crucial point. The dying and rising gods of the ancient Near East follow a pattern. Osiris in Egypt dies and is resurrected in the underworld. Tammuz in Mesopotamia descends to the land of the dead and returns. Baal in Ugarit is killed by Mot and rises again. Adonis, Attis, similar stories. James Fraser, in his monumental Golden Bough, proposed that these myths reflected the agricultural cycle, the death of vegetation in winter, and the resurrection in spring. He saw Jesus' death and resurrection as another instance of this universal pattern. Critics have complicated this picture. Jonathan Z. Smith argued that dying and rising gods was largely a scholarly construct, that the actual myths varied significantly. Tryggve Mettinger responded with a qualified defense, acknowledging differences, while maintaining that genuine death and resurrection narratives exist, particularly for Baal. What is undeniable is that the environment in which Christianity emerged was saturated with stories of divine death and return. Whether the early Christians consciously appropriated these patterns, whether the patterns represent genuine parallels or superficial similarities, whether the resurrection of Jesus fits the type or transcends it, these are questions that scholars continue to debate. But the conversation itself is illuminating. Christianity spoke to a world that already knew about gods who died and returned. The Bible exists in dialogue with libraries it did not preserve. It borrowed the flood and removed polytheism. It knew the chaos dragon and demoted her to water. It encountered the law code and democratized it. It lived among gods who died and rose and proclaimed a resurrection that was the same and utterly different. To read the Bible without this context is to read one side of a conversation. The other speakers have been recovered from the ruins of Nineveh and the sands of Ugarit and the stele of Hammurabi. They do not diminish the Bible. They illuminate it. They show us what the biblical authors knew, what they were responding to, and what they deliberately chose to say differently. The Bible is a text in conversation with its world. The libraries of Nineveh and Ugarit have revealed what the biblical authors were responding to. But there is another kind of witness. Not the texts of surrounding cultures, but the ground beneath our feet. For much of the 20th century, critical scholars argued that key portions of the Hebrew Bible were late compositions. The priestly blessing of Numbers 6:24-26, "The Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord make his face shine upon you," was considered by many to have been written after the Babylonian exile ended in 539 BCE. In 1979, archaeologist Gabriel Barkay was excavating a burial cave at Ketef Hinnom, a site overlooking the Hinnom Valley in Jerusalem. In the cave, he found two tiny silver scrolls, barely an inch long, rolled up like miniature Torah scrolls, designed to be worn around the neck as protective amulets. The scrolls were too fragile to unroll. For years they sat in the Israel Museum, their contents unknown. Then, using painstaking techniques, conservators managed to open them. Inscribed on the silver in ancient Hebrew script was the priestly blessing, and the dating late 7th or early 6th century BCE, before the Babylonian exile, centuries before the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are the oldest surviving biblical texts in existence. They push the documented history of the biblical text back further than anyone had expected. The blessing worn around the neck of someone buried in Jerusalem around 600 BCE is still recited in synagogues and churches today. The earth spoke, and it said this text is older than the skeptics believed. But the earth does not always say what believers expect to hear. The Bible presents Israel as entering the land of Canaan from outside, coming from Egypt, wandering in the wilderness, and conquering the land under Joshua. For generations, this was the assumed history. The Merneptah Stele complicates this picture. Discovered in 1896, this Egyptian victory monument dates to approximately 1208 BCE. Pharaoh Merneptah commissioned it to commemorate his military campaigns. Among the enemies he claims to have defeated, one line stands out: Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. This is the oldest reference to Israel outside the Bible, but notice that it places Israel in Canaan, not wandering in the wilderness, nor enslaved in Egypt. And the hieroglyphic determinatives indicate that Israel is a people group, not a settled territory, suggesting a semi-nomadic population. By 1208 BCE, something called Israel already existed in Canaan. The Egyptians knew about it. They fought against it. They boasted of defeating it. How did Israel get there? Did they come from Egypt as the Bible describes? Did they emerge from within Canaanite society, as some archaeologists suggest? Did a smaller group's Exodus experience become the national founding myth? The earth has spoken, but its testimony raises more questions than it answers. Until 1993, King David had no existence outside the Bible. For critical scholars, this was significant. The Bible's descriptions of his united kingdom ruling from Egypt to the Euphrates seemed an obvious exaggeration. If David existed at all, perhaps he was a minor tribal chieftain whose legend was inflated by later writers. Perhaps he was pure myth, Israel's King Arthur. Then the Tel Dan Stele was discovered. In the ruins of the ancient city of Dan in northern Israel, archaeologist Avraham Biran found fragments of a victory monument in Old Aramaic, dating to approximately 840 BCE. An Aramean king, likely Hazael of Damascus, had erected it to commemorate military victories, and in the inscription he boasts of killing a king from the house of David. Baidud, house of David. This is the first mention of David outside the Bible, not David himself, but his dynasty, the royal house that ruled Judah. An enemy king, boasting of killing one of David's descendants, inadvertently confirmed that David's lineage was a political reality. This does not prove that David conquered an empire or wrote the Psalms, but it proves that within 150 years of his supposed reign, his dynasty was recognized by Israel's enemies. David moved from myth to history. The Bible mentions minor officials and scribes whose existence might seem unprovable. How would we ever verify that a particular scribe actually lived? Sometimes we find their signatures. Bullae are small clay seal impressions used in the ancient world to authenticate documents. A seal would be pressed into wet clay, leaving the seal owner's name. In the City of David excavations, archaeologists discovered bullae bearing names that appear in the book of Jeremiah. Gemariahu, son of Shaphan. Gemariah, in whose chamber the scroll of Jeremiah's prophecies was read. Berechiahu, son of Neriahu. Baruch, son of Neriah, Jeremiah's personal scribe who wrote down the prophet's words. These bullae come from the destruction layer of 586 BCE, the exact year the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, the exact period described in Jeremiah. The book names specific individuals. Their seal impressions have been found in the right archaeological layer. The earth confirms the witness of the text, but the earth does not always confirm. Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, in their influential book The Bible Unearthed, make a startling observation about the wilderness wandering. The Sinai Peninsula has been extensively surveyed. Archaeologists have looked for evidence of the massive Israelite encampment described in the Bible, according to the text. Over 2 million people wandering for 40 years. They have found almost nothing. The sites where the Bible locates major events, Kadesh Barnea, where Israel allegedly spent 38 years, show no evidence of occupation from the relevant period. This does not prove the Exodus did not happen. Nomadic populations leave fewer traces than settled ones. The specific sites mentioned in the Bible may have been named differently in antiquity. The numbers in the text may be literary exaggeration rather than census data, but it does mean that the earth has not confirmed the wilderness wandering as described. The silence is significant, though what it signifies remains debated. But perhaps the most startling archaeological testimony concerns not events but belief. The Hebrew Bible condemns the worship of Asherah. Over 40 times, prophets and reformers demand the destruction of Asherah poles. Kings are judged righteous or wicked partly based on their treatment of these objects. But who was Asherah, and why was her worship such a persistent temptation? In 1975, archaeologist Ze'ev Meshel excavated Shalt Adultery, a remote site in the Sinai. On the walls and storage jars, he found inscriptions dating to approximately 800 BCE. One inscription reads, "I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah." Another, "I bless you by Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah." Yahweh, the God of Israel, and his Asherah. In Canaanite religion, Asherah was the consort of the chief god El. The inscriptions at Shalt Adultery suggest that at least some Israelites worshipped her as Yahweh's consort. The prophets who condemned Asherah worship were fighting against a domestic tradition, a version of the Israelite religion that paired Yahweh with a divine feminine figure. The Bible, as we have it, represents the victory of one theological party over another. The insistence on Yahweh alone, without consort, was not the inevitable shape of Israelite religion. It was a fought-for position, contested over centuries, opposed by practices that persisted into the late monarchy. The earth remembers what the victors tried to erase. The archaeological record does not uniformly confirm the Bible. It does not uniformly contradict it. It complicates it. Some things are verified: the existence of the Davidic dynasty, the presence of Israel in Canaan by 1200 BCE, the names of kings and officials, and the destruction of cities described in the text. Some things are challenged: the scale of the Exodus, the timeline of the conquest, and the extent of Solomon's kingdom. Some things remain silent: the patriarchal narratives, the wilderness wandering, and most events before 1200 BCE. What this means is that the Bible must be read as ancient literature, shaped by the conventions, interests, and theological commitments of its time, even as it is also read as sacred scripture or historical source. The earth speaks, but it speaks with the complexity of the ancient past, affirming some things, questioning others, and remaining silent on still more. And sometimes what the earth remembers, like the inscription pairing Yahweh with his Asherah, points towards something the canonical text itself still preserves, traces of a theology that later tradition tried to erase. Open your Bible to Psalm 82. Read it slowly. God stands in the divine assembly. In the midst of the gods, he renders judgment. Read that again. God stands in the divine assembly. In the midst of the gods. The Hebrew is unambiguous. Elohim nitzav ba'adatel, bekerev Elohim yishpot. The word Elohim appears twice. The first time it takes a singular verb, God stands. The second time it must be plural, among the gods. This is not a translation problem, nor a metaphor. The psalmist envisions Yahweh presiding over a council of divine beings, judging them for their failures and condemning them to mortality. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Gods who will die like men. Divine beings are condemned to mortality for their injustice. What is happening in this text? The answer takes us into one of the most carefully suppressed dimensions of Israelite religion, the divine council. In the ancient Near East, no god ruled alone. The Babylonians depicted Marduk presiding over a council of 50 deities. The Canaanites at Ugarit described El surrounded by the assembly of the sons of El. The concept was ubiquitous, and Israel shared it. The Hebrew Bible preserves dozens of references to this council. In 1 Kings 22, the prophet Micaiah describes a vision. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. In Job 1, the sons of God present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan is among them. In Isaiah 6, the prophet sees Yahweh enthroned among seraphim. In Daniel 7, the Ancient of Days takes his seat surrounded by thousands upon thousands of attendants. Michael Heiser, who devoted his career to this material, was blunt. The term divine council is used by Hebrew and Semitic scholars to refer to the heavenly host, the pantheon of divine beings who administer the affairs of the cosmos. Pantheon. The word sounds out of place in a biblical context, but the texts preserve what the theology tried to erase. And no text preserves it more dramatically than Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9. In most English Bibles you will read, "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel." Sons of Israel, that seems straightforward. God organized the nations around Israel, but when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, scholars found an older version of this text. In the manuscript labeled For Deutsch, dating to the 2nd century BCE, the crucial phrase reads differently. Not sons of Israel, but sons of God. When Elion gave the nations as an inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. The Greek Septuagint, translated by Jewish scholars in Alexandria centuries before Christ, confirms this reading, angels of God. The later Hebrew Masoretic text, standardized around the 10th century CE, has sons of Israel. The earlier witnesses have sons of God. What happened? Emmanuel Tov, editor of 33 volumes of the official Dead Sea Scrolls publication series, was direct. The Masoretic reading reflects a conscious intervention in the text by a scribe uncomfortable with the polytheistic picture of divine beings. A scribe changed the text because it was too polytheistic. Remember the original version. Elion, the Most High, divided the nations among the sons of God. Each divine being received a nation to govern, and Yahweh received Israel as his portion. For Yahweh's portion was his people. Jacob was the lot of his inheritance. Yahweh's portion, as if Israel was allocated to him from a larger distribution. The theological implications are staggering. In this text, Yahweh is not the only God, but one among many, a member of the divine council, the particular deity who received Israel as his inheritance when Elion divided humanity among the gods. But who is Elion? In Canaanite religion, El was the head of the pantheon, the father of the gods, the Most High, Elion. His consort was Athirat, known in Hebrew as Asherah. Together they produced 70 divine sons. 70, the number of nations listed in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. The number of divine beings among whom the nations were distributed. The earliest layers of Israelite religion may not have identified Yahweh with El at all. They may have understood Yahweh as one of El's sons, the particular deity assigned to Israel. If this seems impossible, consider Exodus 15:11. Moses sings after crossing the Red Sea, "Who is like you among the gods, O Yahweh?" Among the gods. Not, "There are no other gods," not the so-called gods. Among the gods. Or Psalm 89, 6, 8. "For who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the sons of gods is like Yahweh, a God feared in the council of the holy ones, great and awesome above all who are around him?" Who among the sons of gods? A God feared in the council, above all who are around him. The comparison only makes sense if the others exist. The insistence on Yahweh alone, without rivals, without consort, without counsel, was not the original position. It was a fought-for theological achievement that emerged over centuries, most forcefully articulated by the prophets of the Babylonian exile. Isaiah 44, 6, from the 6th century BCE reads, "I am the first, and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. Isaiah 45:5 reads, I am Yahweh, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. This is not what the earlier texts say. The earlier texts assume other gods exist. They simply insist that Israel worship only Yahweh. Scholars call this henotheism, or worshipping one God without denying the existence of others. It preceded the strict monotheism that would later become normative. Mark S. Smith, in his definitive study, The Early History of God, traces two processes. First, convergence, in which the qualities of other deities, especially El and Baal, were absorbed into Yahweh. The tender patriarch El and the storm rider Baal merged into a single figure. Second, differentiation, in which Israel deliberately broke with Canaanite tradition, suppressing the goddess, eliminating the council, and insisting on Yahweh's absolute uniqueness. The Bible preserves evidence of both processes. It is an archaeological site of theological development, with later strata built over earlier ones, but not entirely erasing them. And some evidence suggests Yahweh himself was not native to Israel. The oldest poetry in the Hebrew Bible places Yahweh's origins in the south, in the wilderness regions of Sinai, Seir, Edom, and Paran. Deuteronomy 33:2, Yahweh came from Sinai. He shone upon them from Seir. He appeared from Mount Paran. Judges 5:4-5, the Song of Deborah, among the most ancient texts in Scripture. Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before Yahweh, this Sinai, before Yahweh, the God of Israel. Habakkuk 3:3, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. Sinai, Seir, Edom, Paran, Teman. All of these are south and east of Israel proper. Yahweh comes from the wilderness. He marches from foreign territory. Now consider Moses. Moses flees Egypt and arrives in Midian, a region in the southern wilderness. He marries Zipporah, daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. He spends decades there, tending flocks. And it is in Midian that he first encounters Yahweh. At the burning bush, when Moses asks God's name, he receives the answer, I am Yahweh. And then this remarkable statement in Exodus 6:3, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them. The patriarchs knew God as El Shaddai. They did not know the name Yahweh. The name appears for the first time to Moses in Midian, where his father-in-law was a priest. This is the Kenite-Midianite hypothesis, proposed by scholars since the 19th century. Yahweh was originally a deity of the Midianites or Kenites, introduced to Israel through Moses' marriage into a Midianite priestly family. And there is external evidence. Egyptian texts from the reigns of Amenhotep III and Ramesses II, dating to the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, refer to the Shasu of U. The Shasu were nomadic peoples of the southern wilderness. U appears to be a place name associated with them. These are the earliest references to the name Yahweh outside the Bible. They appear before Israel exists as a nation, and they locate Yahweh exactly where the archaic biblical poetry places him, in the wilderness south of Canaan. Did a small group of Israelites escape Egypt, encounter the deity Yahweh in Midianite territory, and carry that cult back to the larger population in Canaan? Did the Exodus story, the foundational narrative of one group, become the national myth of all 12 tribes? We cannot know with certainty, but the evidence suggests that the religion that became Judaism was not born complete. It developed, it absorbed, it excluded, it transformed. The divine council was suppressed, Asherah was cut down, the other gods became angels or demons or ceased to exist. Yahweh absorbed the attributes of El and Baal while distancing from their worship. The particular deity of a wilderness people became the creator of the universe and the only God who is. But the traces remain, in obscure verses, in textual variants, in the archaeology of Kuntilet Adrud and the hymns of Ugarit, in the very name Israel, which means not one who wrestles with Yahweh, but one who wrestles with El. The Bible is this development. a document of a theological revolution, preserving the voices it was trying to silence. Read the text, not what you expect to see, what is actually there. The gods are on the page, you just have to look. And beneath the code is another code. Hebrew is strange among ancient languages. Its letters double as numbers. Aleph equals 1, Bet equals 2, Gimel equals 3, and so on through the alphabet. The system is called gematria, and it means that every Hebrew word has a numerical value revealed by the sum of its letters. The practice is ancient. Babylonians associated numbers with words. Greeks practiced isopsephy, calculating numerical values. References to gematria appear in Second Temple Jewish sources. What this means is that the Hebrew Bible potentially contains a layer of meaning entirely invisible to readers of translations. A mathematical architecture underlies the semantic surface. Is this architecture intentional? Is it coincidental? Distinguishing the two is often impossible, but the patterns themselves are mathematically verifiable. Allow me to reveal it to you. Genesis 14 describes Abraham rescuing his nephew Lot from a coalition of kings. To accomplish this feat, Abraham arms his trained servants. How many? The text is specific, 318, a curiously exact number, not about 300, not many, exactly 318. The Talmud, Nedarim 32a, observes that the name Eliezer, Abraham's chief servant, introduced in Genesis 15:2, has a gematria value of exactly 318. Aleph, 1, plus Lamed, 30, plus Yod, 10, plus Ayin, 70, plus Zayin, 7, plus Resh, 200, equals 318. The rabbis thus concluded that Abraham did not take 318 men. He took one man, Eliezer, whose value was 318. The victory was accomplished through faithful service, not military might. Did the author of Genesis intend this correspondence? We cannot know for certain, but the numerical identity is there, waiting for anyone who does the arithmetic. The Hebrew word for love is ahavah. Its gematria value is 13. The Hebrew word for one is echad. Its gematria value is also 13. When two 13s unite, love between two beings and love joining with unity, they equal 26. The gematria of Yahweh, the sacred name, 26. Yod 10 plus He 5 plus Vav 6 plus He 5 equals 26. Love plus unity equals the divine name. The Shema commands Israel to love the Lord with all their heart. The mathematics of Hebrew connects love and unity directly to the name of God itself. 3 consecutive verses in Exodus, 14:19, 14:20, and 14:21, describe the climactic moment when the Red Sea parts. Each verse contains exactly 72 Hebrew letters. This is unique in Scripture. No other 3 consecutive verses share this property. According to Kabbalistic tradition, when these verses are arranged in a specific pattern, first verse written normally, the second verse written backwards, the third verse normally, and then read vertically rather than horizontally, 72 3-letter combinations emerge. These are the Shem HaMepharash, the 72 names of God. Medieval texts claim that Moses used these names to split the sea. Each 3-letter combination, when suffixed with El or Yah, becomes the name of an angel. Whether you accept the mystical claims or not, the structure is there. 72 letters, 72 letters, 72 letters. A pattern is invisible unless you count. The Gospel of John concludes with a strange specificity. The resurrected Jesus appears to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. They have been fishing all night, catching nothing. Jesus tells them to cast their nets on the right side of the boat. They do, and haul in an enormous catch. And how many fish? John 21:11 specifies 153, exactly 153. Why? Augustine noted that 153 is a triangular number. It is the sum of all integers from 1 to 17. And 17, he suggested, represents the law, 10 commandments, combined with grace, 7 gifts of the Spirit. Jerome claimed that ancient zoologists believed there were 153 species of fish in the sea. The catch thus symbolizes the universal mission of the Church, gathering all nations. The Hebrew phrase Beni ha-Elohim, the sons of God, has a gematria value of exactly 153. While this term originally referred to angels, Christian mystics saw it as a code for the new status of believers. Humans elevated to the level of divine sons, gathered safely into the net. The net does not break despite the enormous number, perhaps symbolizing unity despite diversity. Whatever the intended meaning, and perhaps multiple meanings were intended, the precision of the number signals that this is not random. You just have to look deeper. And no number in Scripture has generated more speculation than 666, the number of the beast, in Revelation 13:18. But what does it mean? The text itself says the number is the number of a man. This suggests a name whose gematria equals 666. Nero Caesar, transliterated into Hebrew as Neron Qsar, yields Nun, 50, plus Resh, 200, plus Vevi, 6, plus Nun, 50, plus Quof, 100, plus Samek, 60, plus Resh, 200, equals 666. Strikingly, some early manuscripts of Revelation give the number as 616, not 666. For centuries, this was considered a scribal error. But when the Hebrew transliteration reflects the Latin spelling of the name, Nero rather than Neron, the final nun is dropped, and the total becomes 616. The variant readings confirm the solution. Different spellings of the same name produce both attested numbers. The beast is Nero. The number is a code that original readers could decode, and that we have recovered. The Sefer Yetzirah, one of the oldest texts of Jewish mysticism, dated variously from the 2nd to 6th century CE, declares that God created the universe through 32 paths of wisdom. These 32 paths comprise the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, plus the 10 sephirot, the divine emanations through which God interacts with creation. The letters in this view are the building blocks of reality. When God said, "Let there be light," the letters themselves brought light into being. The 22 letters are divided into 3 groups. 3 mother letters, Aleph, Mem, Shin, corresponding to air, water and fire, the 3 primordial elements. 7 double letters corresponding to the 7 days, 7 planets and 7 openings of the head. 12 simple letters corresponding to the 12 months, 12 zodiac signs and 12 principal organs. Through proper combination and meditation on these letters, the Kabbalistic tradition teaches, one can participate in the creative power that formed the universe, the legendary basis for the creation of the golem. Whether one takes this literally or symbolically, it represents a radically different understanding of language as the DNA of existence. We have seen how numbers encode meaning in Scripture, the 318 servants who are one man, the 153 fish that signify divine identity, the 666 that spells an emperor's name. But the ancient Israelites encoded something larger still. They encoded the heavens. The system was old. The Talmud reveals the cosmic significance of the number 12. In Bereshit 32b, God answers Israel's lament of abandonment by describing the heavens he created for her sake. I created 12 constellations in the firmament, and for each and every constellation I have created 30 armies, and for each and every army I have created 30 legions, and for each and every legion I have created 30 infantry division leaders, and for each and every infantry division leader I have created 30 military camp leaders, and for each and every military camp leader I have created 30 leaders of forts, and on each and every leader of a fort I have hung 365,000 stars, corresponding to the days of the solar year. And all of them I have created only for your sake. And you said, the Lord has forsaken me, and the Lord has forgotten me. The math describes a fractal universe, spiraling out into trillions of stars. The 12-fold structure of the zodiac is presented as a divinely ordained architecture created for Israel. But where did Israel position itself beneath those 12 constellations? The answer lies in Numbers 2, one of the most architecturally precise chapters in the Torah. God instructs Moses and Aaron on exactly how the tribes must arrange themselves around the tabernacle. Nothing is left to chance. Every tribe has its assigned place, its direction, and its specific weight. The text begins, The Israelites are to camp around the tent of meeting some distance from it, each of them under their standard with the banners of their family. Then the directions unfold, revealing a formation that was not merely a circle, but a living chariot. To the east, toward the sunrise, the divisions of the camp of Judah are to encamp under their standard. According to Midrash, Judah's flag bore the image of a lion. Joined by Issachar and Zebulun, this was the vanguard, and the numbers reveal a massive disparity. This eastern front contained 186,400 men, the largest of all the camps. It was the spearhead, designed to break the path forward. To the south, the divisions of the camp of Reuben under their standard. Reuben's flag bore the image of a man. Joined by Simeon and Gad, this camp numbered 151,450. They represented the human element, balanced and grounded, setting out second. To the west, the divisions of the camp of Ephraim under their standard. Ephraim's flag bore the image of an ox. Joined by Manasseh and Benjamin, this was the smallest camp, numbering 108,100. Facing the setting sun, they formed the rear guard, the foundation of strength and patience. To the north, the standard of the camp of Dan. Dan's tribal symbol was the serpent, matching the zodiac sign of Scorpio. But in the vision of the divine chariot, Merkabah, this face is transformed. In ancient lore, the eagle and the scorpion are deeply linked. The serpent is the creature bound to the dust, while the eagle is the same energy redeemed, soaring toward the sun. Joined by Asher and Naphtali, they numbered 157,600. They were the northern guard, closing the formation. The census numbers reveal the camp was weighted like an arrow, heavy at the front for momentum. The standards reveal it was designed like a throne. Viewed from above, Israel's camp mirrored the zodiacal wheel. The tabernacle stood at the center, the axis around which the constellations turned. By arranging their bodies in the desert dust, Israel built a machine to mirror the stars. 4 directions, 4 lead tribes: lion, man, ox, serpent, or eagle. 12 tribes total, 3 on each side, surrounding the tabernacle at the center. This is the biblical blueprint. But what did it mean? Centuries later, the prophet Ezekiel would see a vision of the divine chariot. He described 4 living creatures surrounding the throne of God. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. The wilderness encampment was a terrestrial mirror of that chariot. The 13th century Midrashic compilation Yalkut Shimoni provided the key to how this was understood in the medieval imagination. It suggests the tribes were facing constellations. Judah, the lion, faced the spring signs of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. Reuben, the man, faced the summer zenith of Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. Ephraim, the ox, faced the autumn signs of Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius. Dan, the eagle, faced the winter depths of Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. These 4 figures of lion, ox, man, and eagle reappear in Revelation 4, surrounding the throne of God. They have been interpreted in countless ways, but one interpretation has ancient roots. These are the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: Leo the lion, Taurus the bull, Aquarius the water-bearer, depicted as a human, and Scorpio. Scorpio as an eagle requires a better explanation. In ancient astrological tradition, Scorpio was associated with 3 creatures representing levels of spiritual development. The scorpion symbolized the lowest level, bound to earth, reactive, venomous. The serpent represented an intermediate stage. The eagle represented the highest transformation, the creature that could soar above material concerns and gaze at the sun. The constellation Aquila the eagle rises simultaneously with Scorpio in the night sky. They are paratonellons, companion constellations. The ancients knew this. When Ezekiel saw lion, bull, man, and eagle surrounding the divine throne, he was seeing the 4 fixed points of the zodiac, the pillars of the celestial sphere, eternally stable, while the other signs wheeled around them. The early church connected these 4 figures to the 4 gospel writers. Matthew is the man because his gospel begins with the human genealogy of Jesus. Mark is the lion because his gospel opens with John the Baptist roaring in the wilderness. Luke is the ox, because his gospel begins with the priestly sacrifice of Zechariah. John is the eagle, because his gospel begins with the divine Logos, soaring above the others before all creation. You can see this symbolism in countless medieval manuscripts and church decorations. The four evangelists, each with their zodiacal creature. The book that contains the story of Christ, framed by the fixed points of heaven. When the wandering stopped, the tents turned to stone, but the code remained. The temple in Jerusalem was simply the desert encampment solidified into permanent architecture. In 93 CE, the Jewish historian Josephus, who had served as a priest in the Jerusalem temple before its destruction, described the temple's symbolism in his work, Jewish War. His testimony is extraordinary because he knew what the structures meant. He had served in them. Now the 7 lamps signified the 7 planets, for so many there were springing out of the candlestick. Now the 12 loaves that were upon the table signified the circle of the zodiac and the year. This is how a priest explains what the sacred objects represented. The menorah's 7 branches were the 7 planets: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. The 12 loaves of showbread were the 12 signs of the zodiac. The temple was a model of the cosmos. Josephus continued in Jewish antiquities. And for the 12 stones, whether we understand by them the months, or whether we understand the like number of the signs of that circle which the Greeks call the zodiac, we shall not be mistaken in their meaning. The 12 stones on the high priest's breastplate represented the zodiac signs. Each tribe corresponded to a sign. When the high priest entered the Holy of Holies wearing those stones, he carried the cosmos on his chest. The blue of his robe was the sky. The ephod represented the 4 elements. The 2 sardonyxes on his shoulders were the sun and the moon. The vestments were a wearable universe. Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher writing a generation earlier, independently affirmed the same symbolism. The candlestick he placed at the south, figuring thereby the movements of the luminaries above, symbols of what the men of science call planets. 2 Jewish intellectuals, one in Jerusalem and one in Alexandria, both described the temple as an image of the heavens, and the system was old. The temple itself was a cosmic map. The outer court, accessible to Israelites and Gentiles alike, represented the earth and sea, the visible world of ordinary existence. The holy place, where only priests could enter, represented the heavens, the realm of stars and planets. The Holy of Holies, penetrated only by the high priest once per year on Yom Kippur, represented heaven itself, the dwelling of God beyond the visible cosmos. The veil separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies was woven in 4 colors. Josephus explains, "It was a Babylonian curtain, embroidered with blue and fine linen and scarlet and purple, and of a contexture that was truly wonderful. And then, this curtain was very ornamental and embroidered with all sorts of flowers which the earth produces, and there were interwoven into it all that was mystical in the heavens." The curtain depicted the cosmos. To pass through it was to pass through the boundaries separating the visible universe from the invisible divine realm. When the Gospels report that this veil was torn at the moment of Jesus' death, the symbolism is not merely architectural. The barrier between heaven and earth has been breached. The boundary of the cosmos has been opened. The architecture was waiting. Then the actors arrived. Enter the Magi. Matthew 2 introduces these figures without embarrassment. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." The Greek word is magor. These were not wise men in some generic sense. They were professional astrologers, members of a priestly caste in Persia and Babylon, likely followers of Zoroaster. Their tradition was not silent on these matters. Zoroastrian prophecy spoke of a Saoshyant, a universal savior who would arise to renew the world. To them, the stars were not random lights, but the clockwork of divine destiny. The text assumes their craft works. They saw a star. They correctly interpreted it as signaling the birth of a Jewish king. They traveled hundreds of miles based on that interpretation, and they found what they were looking for. Matthew does not critique or qualify their astrology. He presents it as functional. The heavens declared the birth of Christ to those who knew how to read them. What was the star? The question has fascinated astronomers for centuries. Johannes Kepler, in 1614, proposed a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BCE, a rare alignment that occurred 3 times that year in the constellation Pisces. Jupiter was the king planet. Saturn was associated with Jews in ancient astrology. Pisces was linked to the land of Israel, a celestial announcement in the Jewish sign involving the king planet and the Jewish planet. Michael Molnar, in his 1999 study, The Star of Bethlehem, The Legacy of the Magi, proposed instead the moon occulting Jupiter in Aries on April 17, 6 BCE. In ancient astrology, the moon blocking Jupiter in Aries would signify the birth of a divine king in the region governed by Aries, which included Judea. Whatever the precise phenomenon, the Magi saw it and came. And the fish symbolism of Christianity itself may encode something larger. The Greek word for fish is ichthys. Early Christians used it as an acrostic. Iesus Christos Theou huios soter. Iesus Christos Theou huios soter. Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. But why fish? Jesus called disciples who were fishermen. He made them fishers of men. He multiplied loaves and fishes. After the resurrection, he appeared on the shore while the disciples were fishing and ate fish with them. The miraculous catch in John 21 numbered exactly 153 fish, and Jesus was born at the turning of an age. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, causes the vernal equinox to drift backward through the zodiac at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. A complete cycle takes approximately 25,800 years. Each zodiacal age lasts roughly 2,150 years. The vernal equinox had been in Aries for 2 millennia, the age of the ram. Abraham sacrificed a ram. Moses saw a burning bush that was not consumed. Passover required a lamb. The shofar was a ram's horn. Around the time of Christ's birth, give or take a few centuries, the equinox was entering Pisces, the age of the fishes. And suddenly, a religion emerged whose central symbols were fish, whose first apostles were fishermen, whose communities marked their meeting places with the sign of a fish, whose baptismal fonts were called piscinae, fish ponds, whose converts were called the little fishes by Tertullian. Carl Jung, in his 1951 work Ion, was fascinated by this convergence. Christ was born as the first fish of the Pisces era and was doomed to die as the last ram of the declining Aries era. The Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, the transitional figure who was both ram and fish, the sacrifice of the old age who inaugurates the new. Did the early Christians know about precession? Hipparchus of Nicaea discovered it around 129 BCE, over a century before Jesus' birth. The knowledge circulated in educated circles. Whether the Gospel writers consciously encoded precessional symbolism or whether they intuited patterns they could not articulate, the fish are there. The heavens are in the text for those who know how to read them. A 7-branched lampstand tracking the planets, 12 stones encoding the zodiac, 4 cherubim marking the fixed signs, magi reading the stars, a savior born at the turning of an age. The Bible is not merely a library of religious texts. It is an image of the cosmos rendered in narrative and symbol. The temple was a small cosmos. The high priest was a walking universe. The story of salvation was written in the stars before it was written in scrolls. As Genesis 1:14 reveals, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Look up. The heaven you see is the same heaven that spoke to the Magi. The stars are still speaking, for those with ears to hear." We have seen the heavens encoded in the temple, the 7 planets in the menorah, the 12 signs in the showbread, and the cosmos worn on the high priest's chest. But there is another presence woven through these texts, suppressed more thoroughly than the divine counsel, more controversial than the astral symbolism, a presence that later tradition worked systematically to erase, the feminine face of God. Open the book of Proverbs to chapter 8. a woman speaks. But this is no ordinary woman. Listen to what she claims. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth. Before creation, before the earth, before the depths and the mountains, she was there. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, then I was beside him like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. She was beside him, a master craftsman, rejoicing in creation. Her name is Chokmah, wisdom. And in this passage, she is not merely an attribute of God. She is a person, a presence, a divine feminine figure who existed before the world and participated in its making. The Hebrew word chokmah is grammatically feminine. The Greek translation is Sophia, also feminine. When early Christians encountered this passage, they saw a startling description of a divine being, present at creation, the firstborn of God's works, delighting in humanity. The parallels to John's prologue are unmistakable. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Word. Logos in Greek, masculine. But the structure is wisdom's structure, present at the beginning, with God, the agent of creation, the source of light and life. Scholars have long recognized that John drew on wisdom traditions. The logos of the gospel absorbed the Sophia of Proverbs. D. Moody Smith notes that the reason John chose the masculine logos rather than the feminine Sophia to describe Jesus may have been precisely because wisdom is feminine in both Greek and Hebrew. The divine feminine was translated into the masculine, but she did not disappear, not entirely. In the deuterocanonical literature, the books included in Catholic and Orthodox canons, but not in Protestant Bibles, wisdom develops further. Sirach 24 has wisdom speak, I came forth from the mouth of the Most High, and covered the earth like a mist. I dwelt in the highest heavens, and my throne was in a pillar of cloud. The wisdom of Solomon goes further still. Chapter 7 describes Sophia as a breath of the power of God and a pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty, a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God and an image of his goodness. A breath of God's power, an emanation, a reflection of eternal light, a divine feminine figure, distinct yet inseparable from God, the medium through which divine glory enters the world. Mark S. Smith, in his study of Israelite religion, notes that scholars have compared wisdom to Asherah, suggesting that wisdom perhaps included some features of Asherah. The goddess who was suppressed in official theology may have survived, transformed, cloaked in acceptable philosophical language as personified wisdom. The divine feminine was too persistent to eliminate. She was renamed, but in the mystical traditions, she returned undisguised. The Kabbalists of medieval Spain developed a theology of the Shekinah, the divine presence, as explicitly feminine. The term comes from the Hebrew root shakan, to dwell. In earlier rabbinic literature, Shekinah referred to God's presence in the world without a specific gender. The Kabbalists transformed her. In the Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, the Shekinah is the 10th Sephirah, the final emanation through which God interacts with creation. She is Malkut, sovereignty, and she is feminine. Gershom Scholem, the preeminent scholar of Jewish mysticism, wrote, "The introduction of this idea was one of the most important and lasting innovations of Kabbalism, proof that it responded to a deep-seated religious need." The Zohar describes the Shekinah as mother, sister, daughter, and bride of God. When the temple was destroyed, she went into exile with her children, Israel. She wanders with them in their dispersion, suffering their suffering, mourning their mourning. And at the end of days, she will be reunited with the masculine dimension of deity. The Sabbath, in Kabbalistic thought, is a weekly taste of that reunion. When Jews welcome the Sabbath, they are welcoming the bride. The hymn Leka Dodi, Come My Beloved, is addressed to the Shekinah, Come, O Bride, Come, O Bride, the divine feminine exiled and awaiting return. This became central to Jewish liturgy and practice. And in the Christian tradition, though official theology suppressed goddess language, the feminine kept erupting. Mary Magdalene has been the site of the fiercest battles. The canonical Gospels agree on certain facts. She was present at the crucifixion when most male disciples had fled. She was present at the burial. She was the first witness to the empty tomb. In John's Gospel, she is the first to see the risen Christ, and he sends her to announce the resurrection to the other disciples. This last detail earned her the title Apostola Apostolorum, Apostle to the Apostles. She was sent by Christ to witness to those who would become the leaders of the Church. The Eastern Orthodox Church never forgot this. They honored Mary Magdalene as equal to the Apostles, a title given to only a handful of saints. But in the West, something happened. In 591 CE, Pope Gregory the Great delivered a homily that conflated three distinct women: Mary Magdalene, the unnamed sinful woman of Luke 7, who anoints Jesus' feet with tears and expensive perfume, and Mary of Bethany, sister of Martha and Lazarus. Gregory's fusion was creative but unfounded. Luke does not identify the sinful woman. He introduces Mary Magdalene in the next chapter as a separate person from whom 7 demons had gone out. There is no textual basis for combining them, but Gregory's conflation stuck. For nearly 1400 years, Western Christianity imagined Mary Magdalene as a reformed prostitute. The great female witness to the resurrection became a cautionary tale about fallen women who repent. The Catholic Church officially corrected this error in 1969, separating the Magdalene from the anonymous sinner. In 2016, Pope Francis elevated her feast day to the same rank as the male apostles, formally acknowledging her apostolic status. But the damage persists. Ask most Western Christians about Mary Magdalene, and they will mention prostitution. The apostle to the apostles was slandered for 14 centuries. The Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi suggest why the Orthodox tradition may have wanted to diminish her. The Gospel of Mary, preserved in a fragmentary Berlin manuscript and among the Nag Hammadi finds, depicts Mary Magdalene as the recipient of special revelation from Jesus. After the resurrection, when the male disciples are despairing, Mary comforts them and begins to share the teachings Jesus gave to her privately. Peter challenges her. Did he really speak with a woman without our knowledge? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? Another disciple, Levi, defends her. Peter, you have always been hot-tempered. Now I see you contending against the woman like the adversaries. But if the Savior made her worthy, who are you indeed to reject her? The Gospel of Philip, another Nag Hammadi text, goes further. It describes Mary as Jesus' koinonos, a Greek word meaning companion or partner. It states that Jesus loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her. A hole in the manuscript swallows the crucial word. Mouth? Cheek? Forehead? We cannot know. The Gnostics remembered a Mary who received revelation, who taught, and who was honored above male apostles. The Orthodox tradition remembered a prostitute. Which memory served whose interests? And then there is the question of deliberate suppression within the canonical text itself. 1 Corinthians 14:34, 35 commands, the women should keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says. If there is anything they desire to learn, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. This passage has been used for centuries to silence women, but there is substantial evidence that Paul did not write it. First, textual evidence. These verses appear after verse 33 in most manuscripts, but in some important Western manuscripts, they appear after verse 40. When a passage floats to different locations, it is a sign of later insertion. Scribes did not know where to put it because it was not original. Second, Philip Payne, a New Testament scholar, identified markings called distigmai in the margins of Codex Vaticanus, one of our oldest Bibles, at precisely this passage. These double dots mark text that was known to be disputed. Third, the passage contradicts what Paul writes just 3 chapters earlier. In 1 Corinthians 11:5, Paul discusses how women should wear head coverings when praying or prophesying. He assumes women are praying and prophesying in the assembly. He does not say they should be silent. He says they should cover their heads when they speak. How can Paul assume women prophesy in the church in chapter 11 and command their absolute silence in chapter 14? A compelling explanation, supported by many textual critics, is that he didn't write both. They argue the silencing passage was inserted later by scribes who wanted to restrict women's roles, placing words in Paul's mouth that he never spoke. 1 Timothy 2:12 similarly commands, "I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, rather she is to remain quiet." But the majority of critical scholars consider the pastoral epistles, 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, to be pseudepigraphal, written by later authors in Paul's name, not by Paul himself. The vocabulary, style, and theology differ markedly from the undisputed letters. Over 300 words appear in the pastorals that appear nowhere else in Paul's letters. If these letters are post-Pauline, then the restrictions they impose on women represent not Paul's teaching, but a later, more conservative trajectory. The feminine was suppressed, in theology by absorbing wisdom into the masculine logos, in history by slandering Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, in the text itself possibly by inserting passages that silenced women's voices. But she keeps returning. God as mother appears even in the Hebrew Bible. Isaiah 42:14. For a long time I have held my peace. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. God crying out in labor. God giving birth. Isaiah 49:15. Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. God as nursing mother. God with a womb. Isaiah 66:13. As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you. The Hebrew word for spirit, ruach, is grammatically feminine. In Aramaic, the Semitic language Jesus spoke, rucha, is also feminine. Early Syriac texts, among the oldest Christian writings, used feminine verbs when speaking of the Holy Spirit. The Odes of Solomon, a collection of early Christian hymns dated to the 2nd century, includes this. I rested on the Spirit of the Lord, and she lifted me up to heaven. She, the divine feminine, has been suppressed but not destroyed. She persists in wisdom and Shekinah, in Mary Magdalene and Mary the Mother, in the Spirit who broods over the waters at creation and descends like a dove at Jesus' baptism. The monotheism that emerged from Israel's theological revolution was masculine, one God, Father, King, Lord of hosts. But the texts remember another possibility, a wisdom who rejoiced before him at creation, a presence who dwelt in the temple and goes into exile with her people, a spirit whose Hebrew name is feminine. She is still in the book. You just have to look. We have now examined the surface, the shadows, the earth, the gods who preceded monotheism, the codes hidden in letters, the heavens mapped in the temple, and the feminine divine suppressed but never erased. There is one layer left, the deepest of all, the psychological. Carl Jung was not a theologian. He was a psychiatrist who had treated thousands of patients and mapped the contours of the human psyche through decades of clinical work. And when he turned his attention to religious texts, he did not ask whether they were true. He asked why they endured. Why did they impact us so profoundly with visible effects, staining the history of humankind? He answered that these texts encode the fundamental patterns of psychological development. They are about gods and heroes and about us. They externalize in narrative form the internal journey every consciousness must take. Christ, in Jung's analysis, is a symbol of the self, the archetype of wholeness toward which the fragmented psyche strives. The life of Christ follows the pattern of individuation, birth in obscurity, temptation by the shadow, gathering of companions, confrontation with authorities, death and rebirth. When Christians meditate on Christ's passion, they are psychologically rehearsing their own. But Jung's most controversial work was not about Christ, it was about Job. In 1952, he published Answer to Job, a book that scandalized theologians and fascinated psychologists. Its argument was explosive. In the book of Job, human moral consciousness surpasses divine moral consciousness, and this forces God himself to transform. Consider the plot. Job is righteous. God knows Job is righteous. Satan proposes a test. Take away everything Job has and see if he still worships. God agrees. Job loses his children, his wealth, and his health. He sits in ashes, scraping his sores. His friends insist he must have sinned. Job insists he has not. And then God appears, out of the whirlwind, with one of the most overwhelming speeches in all literature. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of Orion? The divine speech is not an answer to Job's complaint. It is an assertion of absolute power. God parades his cosmic majesty. Leviathan, Behemoth, the storehouses of snow, the gates of death. The message is clear. I am incomprehensibly vast. You are not. Job's response is famous. I'd heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. This is usually read as a humble submission. Job sees God's greatness and accepts his place. Jung read it differently. The God who appears from the whirlwind, Jung observed, does not address Job's moral complaint. Job asked, "Why do the innocent suffer while the wicked prosper?" God answered, "Look at the hippopotamus. Look at the crocodile. This is not a moral answer. This is a display of a moral power. Yahweh must become man precisely because he has done man a wrong," Jung wrote. He, the guardian of justice, knows that every wrong must be expiated, and wisdom knows that moral law is above even him. Because his creature has surpassed him, he must regenerate himself. In Jung's reading, Job's stubborn moral integrity, his refusal to confess sins he did not commit, his insistence on justice even against God, represented an advance in human consciousness. Job held fast to ethics when the Almighty abandoned them. And this, Jung argued, forced the divine image itself to evolve. The incarnation in this view is God's response to Job. God becomes human to experience what it is to suffer unjustly. The cross answers what the whirlwind evaded. My God, why have you forsaken me?" is Job's question in the mouth of God himself. Whether or not one accepts Jung's theology, his insight into the text remains compelling. Job confronts the oldest problem in religion, the problem of evil, of undeserved suffering, of a universe that does not align with our moral expectations. And the book of Job does not solve this problem. It dramatizes it with merciless honesty. The text trusts its readers with unanswered questions. That is why it endures. But Jung saw psychological depth not only in the wisdom literature, he saw it in the patriarchal narratives themselves. Consider Jacob and Esau, two brothers, twins, but radically different. Esau is hairy, ruddy, a hunter, a man of the outdoors. Jacob is smooth, a tent dweller, a man of cunning. From the womb, they struggled. Esau emerged first, but Jacob grasped his heel. In Jungian terms, they are ego and shadow. The shadow is everything the conscious personality rejects, denies, and exiles. It is not necessarily evil. It is simply everything we have decided not to be. The athlete who represses his intellectual side, the intellectual who represses her physical nature, the civilized person who cannot access his wildness. Jacob is chosen. Jacob receives the blessing. Jacob is the ancestor of Israel. Esau is rejected. Esau is tricked. Esau becomes the ancestor of Edom, the eternal enemy. But the rejected twin does not disappear. He lives in the wilderness, growing strong, nursing his grievance. And eventually, the brothers must meet again. Genesis 32 describes what happened the night before the encounter. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Jacob is alone in the darkness, on the boundary between two lands, and something attacks him. Who is this man? The text does not say, not at first. Jacob wrestles all night, neither prevailing. At daybreak, the figure strikes Jacob's hip, dislocating it. Jacob still does not let go. Let me go, for the day is breaking. I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? Jacob. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. Erich Neumann, a student of Jung, wrote a book on this narrative. The wrestling at Peniel is the encounter with the shadow. The night before Jacob must face his rejected twin, he is attacked by a figure that the tradition variously interprets as an angel, as a man, as God himself, and as the guardian angel of Esau. Rashi, the medieval commentator, explicitly says this: Jacob wrestled with the prince of Esau. Jacob cannot face his brother until he has faced his brother's spiritual essence. He cannot integrate what he rejected without a night of struggle. And the marks of that struggle are permanent. Jacob receives a new name, Israel, meaning one who struggles with God or one who struggles with El, but he also receives a limp. He will walk wounded for the rest of his life. The permanent limp is the mark of genuine transformation. You do not integrate the shadow without being changed by it. You do not wrestle all night with your depths and walk away uninjured. When dawn comes, Jacob crosses the river to meet Esau. He bows 7 times. He offers extravagant gifts. He calls Esau, my lord. And Esau runs to embrace him. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. The rejected twin forgives. The shadow and the ego reconcile. The division is healed. This is a map of psychological development. The journey toward wholeness requires confronting what we have rejected, struggling with it through the darkness, and emerging transformed but wounded, able at last to embrace what we had exiled. Joseph Campbell, whose hero with 1,000 faces identified the archetypal patterns underlying myth, saw these same structures in Moses. The hero begins in an ordinary world. Moses is raised in Pharaoh's palace, but he is secretly other, a Hebrew among Egyptians, a prince who does not belong. The call to adventure comes, the burning bush that is not consumed, the voice that speaks the divine name. The hero refuses the call. Moses offers excuse after excuse. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? They will not believe me. I am not eloquent. Send someone else. The supernatural aid appears, the staff that becomes a serpent, Aaron as spokesman, the assurance of divine presence, the crossing of the threshold, the Red Sea parts. The old world is left behind. There is no return. The belly of the whale, 40 years in the wilderness, the descent into the underworld of wandering, the ordeal, Sinai's fire, the golden calf, the tablets shattered and rewritten, the boon, Torah, the law that will shape a civilization, the return, leading the people toward the promised land, which Moses himself will only see from a distance. Campbell's point was not that Moses consciously followed a template. It was that the human psyche produces certain patterns again and again because they reflect the structure of transformation itself. The hero's journey is the journey every consciousness takes when it grows from one stage to another. And the great symbolic locations of the Bible function as psychological states. Egypt, in Hebrew Mitzrayim, is related to the word Mitzrim, meaning narrow straits, constriction, pressure. Egypt is the place of bondage, of crushed identity, of labor without meaning. Pharaoh is the tyrant complex, the internalized oppressor that tells you that you are worthless, that your straw quota has been raised, that you will never escape. The Exodus is liberation, but liberation is not merely external. The people leave Egypt, but Egypt does not leave the people. In the wilderness, they long for the flesh pots. They built a golden calf. They grumble and rebel. You can cross the Red Sea and still be enslaved in your mind. 40 years of wandering is not divine punishment. It is the time required for the slave generation to die, for a new consciousness to emerge, for people shaped by bondage to become capable of freedom. Babylon functions similarly. The great city of confusion, its name derived from Balal, to mix up, to confuse. The Tower of Babel is the attempt to storm heaven through human effort. Its result is the shattering of language, the loss of understanding, the scattering of humanity. The Babylonian exile is spiritual homelessness, the loss of the sacred center, and life among strangers who worship strange gods. And the prophet's promise of return from Babylon is a promise of psychological restoration, the rebuilding of the temple within, and the recovery of lost identity. These are repeating patterns. Every consciousness knows its Egypt, its wilderness, and its Babylon. Every soul must make an exodus, endure a wandering, and return from exile. The text maps the journey, but no book has been subjected to more sustained psychological analysis than Revelation. Edward Edinger, a Jungian analyst, devoted his final work to this most mysterious text. Archetype of the Apocalypse reads John's vision as a map of individuation at its most extreme. The Apocalypse, Edinger argued, is a psychological process. It happens whenever the ego is confronted with contents from the unconscious, so overwhelming that the old structures of identity cannot survive. Revelation depicts 4 phases. First, revelation itself, the shattering new insight, the breaking through of transpersonal images into consciousness. The heavens open, the throne appears, the scroll is unsealed. Second, judgment. The profound awareness of the shadow, the recognition of everything the conscious personality has denied and rejected. The books are opened, the dead are judged, nothing is hidden. Third, destruction. The dismantling of the old world, the collapse of structures that can no longer hold. Babylon falls, the beast is defeated, the old heaven and earth pass away. Fourth, the new world, the emergence of a new center, a new integration, a new wholeness. The new Jerusalem descends from heaven. God dwells with humanity. There is no more sea. The dragon, the beast, and the whore of Babylon are shadow contents. They represent everything the community projected outward, the demonic other that threatened faithful identity. Revelation makes them explicit, brings them into consciousness, and defeats them. The New Jerusalem is the mandala, Jung's term for the circular symbol of wholeness that appears spontaneously in dreams and visions when the psyche approaches integration. A perfect cube, a perfect circle, walls of 12 jewels representing the complete zodiac, gates of 12 pearls representing the complete Israel. Edinger warned that the apocalypse archetype was active in the modern collective psyche, but largely unconscious. The archetype of the apocalypse has been activated in our collective psyche and is playing itself out in an unconscious, collective, and therefore destructive manner. When the transformation that should happen inwardly is projected outwardly, the result is a political catastrophe. The apocalyptic mind sees enemies everywhere, demands the destruction of Babylon, and waits for fire from heaven. The alternative is to recognize the apocalypse as a psychological process, to read John's vision as a map of the inner journey, to understand that the beast one must defeat and the new city one must enter are dimensions of the self. This is not to reduce the Bible to psychology. It is to recognize that the Bible has always functioned psychologically, shaping the inner lives of its readers, providing images for experiences that would otherwise remain inchoate. When Jacob wrestled in the darkness, he wrestled with his own depths. When Israel wandered in the wilderness, it was learning to become a people. When John saw a new heaven and a new earth, he was seeing the possibility of transformed consciousness. The text is a mirror. It reflects back what we bring to it. But it is not only a mirror, it is also a lamp. It illuminates dimensions of experience we would never have found without it. The patriarchs and prophets are within us. The exodus and exile are within us. The descent into Egypt and the return from Babylon are journeys we make in the course of a single life, sometimes in the course of a single day. We imagine we have read this book. The deeper truth is that it has been reading us, diagnosing our bondage, mapping our wilderness, promising our return. We have traveled far, from the wicked Bible to the horned Moses, through virgins and young women, unicorns and demons, into the shadow library of lost books and added passages, back to Babylon, where Utnapishtim built his ark 1,000 years before Noah, into the divine council, where Yahweh once stood among the sons of God, down into the earth where silver scrolls and seal impressions testify, through the mathematics of letters and the zodiac encoded in the temple, into the presence of wisdom, who rejoiced before God at creation, and the Shekinah, who went into exile with her people, and finally into the depths of the psyche, where Jacob still wrestles in the darkness, and every consciousness makes its exodus from Egypt. What have we found? Not a debunked Bible, not a defended Bible, a stranger Bible, stranger and richer than either the skeptics or the believers usually acknowledge. This is a text where a single missing "not" can command adultery, where a translation choice can give a prophet horns for a millennium, where 21 lost books haunt the margins of what survives, where the earth confirms some claims and remains silent on others, where numbers encode names and letters build worlds. This is not the Bible of simple reading. This is not the rule book dropped from heaven that some imagine, nor the primitive mythology that others dismiss. This is something more interesting. A library of texts produced over more than 1,000 years by dozens of authors, edited by generations of scribes, translated into every major language on earth, interpreted by mystics and scholars and ordinary readers for 2 millennia, and still yielding secrets to those who look. The scribes who preserved anomalies they could have corrected, the translators who made choices that shaped civilizations, the communities that included some books and burned others, the archaeologists who dig up seal impressions with biblical names, the comparative scholars who hear Gilgamesh echoing in the flood and Marduk behind the chaos waters, the historians who trace Yahweh's journey from a wilderness deity to the only God who is, the Kabbalists who find divine names encoded in the parting of the sea and the cosmos mapped in the temple furnishings, the mystics who sought the Shekinah in exile, the psychologists who find archetypes encoded in the patriarchal narratives. All of them have participated in an ongoing conversation that the text initiates but never concludes. Why does this matter? Because how we understand this book shapes how we understand ourselves. The Bible is not only a religious text, it is the operating system of Western consciousness. Its metaphors structure our language. Scapegoat, Sabbath, Babel, Babylon. Its narratives shape our sense of history. That time moves from creation through fall toward redemption. Its symbols inhabit our dreams, the garden, the flood, the cross. Even secular moderns who have never read a page are shaped by this book. We inherit its assumptions about guilt and innocence, its patterns of prophecy and fulfillment, its conviction that history has meaning. To misunderstand the Bible is to misunderstand the foundations of our own minds. And we have been misunderstanding it because we have been reading the surface while the depths went unexplored. We have been reading translations while the original whispered secrets we could not hear. We have been reading the final draft while the revision marks remained invisible. What now? I'm not telling you what to believe about this book. That is not my role, and it would not be appropriate. But I am telling you that whatever you believe, there is more to see. The text rewards those who look closely. The anomalies are doorways to be entered. The contradictions are evidence of complexity to be embraced. The Bible was never meant to be mastered. It was meant to be entered. It is a labyrinth whose center keeps receding as you walk, revealing new passages with every turn. 100 secrets, 100 doorways. And behind each door, 100 more. The book that shaped the world continues to withhold as much as it reveals. And finally, a direct word to the soul members. Look at what we have uncovered. From the horned Moses to the encoded zodiac, from the feminine divine to the psychological depths of Job. This level of excavation is not possible in the shallows. It takes resources, it takes time, and it takes a sanctuary where these ideas can be explored without fear. You have built that sanctuary. In the ancient world, the scribe could only write because the patron stood at the gate. You are the patrons of this work. You are the custodians of the shadow library. This video is yours. It is the proof of what we can do together. The surface is fragile, but the foundation, our foundation, is solid. Let us keep digging, which may be precisely why it endures.